Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where the questions are vast, the answers are gentle, and science takes its time like a tide rolling quietly to shore. Tonight, we're going somewhere dark. Not frightening, but hushed. Ancient. A world that begins just below the waves and stretches into the deepest places on Earth. Places more mysterious than the surface of the moon. Tonight we're diving into the deep sea. Or rather, wondering why, after all our progress, so much of it remains untouched. It's strange, isn't it? We launch telescopes into the cosmos, land rovers on distant planets, map the galaxies, but when it comes to the ocean just beyond our toes, most of it is still a secret. Vast, uncharted, and almost dreamlike in its remoteness. So I wonder, where are you listening from tonight? And how far are you from the nearest coastline? A few miles? 1,000? Funny, isn't it? The sea is everywhere, and yet the deep is nowhere we ever go. If this gentle drift through wonder helps you rest, if it calms your mind or gives your thoughts something soft to hold, I'd be ever so grateful if you'd like the video or subscribe to this sleepy little corner of science. It helps others find their way here too, to rest, to learn, or just to float for a while. Now, I do hope this journey doesn't stir up so much curiosity that it keeps you wide awake. But if it does, well, you'll be in good company, with anglerfish, ancient currents, and submarines that hum like lullabies beneath the waves. So settle in, let your shoulders soften, take a long, slow breath, and let's begin. Because somewhere between the sunlit shallows and the trenches that swallow mountains lies the quiet story of why, even now, the deep sea remains unknown. Have you ever stood at the edge of the sea and felt small? Not in a bad way, not like shrinking under pressure, but in that expansive, almost enchanted way. The kind of small that makes you feel part of something much larger. The horizon blurs, the water shifts in silent conversation with the moon, and beneath those soft surface ripples, an entire world keeps breathing, unseen. There's something about the deep sea that stirs a very particular kind of wonder. Not quite fear, not quite awe, something older, primal. It's the sort of quiet that makes your mind lean in and whisper, what else is down there? We talk about space as the final frontier, but the deep ocean doesn't feel futuristic. It feels forgotten. It's not out of reach because it's far away. It's out of reach because it's right here and still unknown. That contradiction, close yet alien, gives it a dreamlike pull. Like remembering a place you've never actually been. And when we think of the deep sea, we don't picture maps or measurements. We picture feelings. A dark, endless expanse. Flickers of bioluminescence blinking like stars trapped beneath miles of water. The lonely call of a whale echoing through liquid dusk. A sense of pressure, stillness, secrets kept. For many, the deep sea lives not in facts, but in fables. Monsters with glowing teeth, ghost ships drifting without crew, lost cities in glass domes of coral. Even today, when we hear the words unexplored ocean, our minds don't immediately reach for sonar or robotics. We reach for myth, leviathans, abysses, forgotten things. Isn't it odd how a part of our own planet can feel so completely untethered from daily life? We wake up, scroll through news from across the globe, track hurricanes from satellites, watch footage of Mars in 4K, and yet if you ask someone what's at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the answer might be, I don't know, something strange. And that strange feeling isn't just about distance, it's about perception. We tend to measure places by their accessibility, by how easily we can categorize them, imagine them, picture ourselves inside them. A bustling city. You can smell the pavement. A mountain trail. You can feel the crunch of boots on stone. Even space, for all its silence, is painted in sleek spacecraft, starlight, and the echo of radio signals. But the deep sea? The real deep? That's harder. Try to visualize it, not the coral reefs or the kelp forests, but the Hadal zone, the pitch-black, freezing, high-pressure expanse beneath 6,000 meters. There's no light, no sound, just the weight of water crushing down with the force of skyscrapers. Our senses fail us. There are no familiar cues, no solid ground to mentally stand on. And in that emptiness, our imagination fills the void. In psychology, there's a term called the uncanny valley, that eerie feeling when something is almost human, but not quite. It's the discomfort of recognition without certainty. The deep sea seems to occupy its own kind of uncanny space, familiar in theory, but deeply disorienting in experience. It's Earth, but sideways. And then there's the silence. We often think of silence as peaceful, but the silence of the deep is different. It's not quiet like a bedroom at night. It's quiet like a cathedral carved from pressure and ancient salt. It's a silence so complete it bends inward, as if the ocean itself is holding its breath. That hush creates a psychological distance, the kind that makes you hesitate, not from fear, but from reverence. That distance isn't just emotional, it's physical too. We're land dwellers. We breathe air, navigate by light, live in three-dimensional spaces that we can see and touch. The deep ocean defies all of that. It's not just hostile to human life, it's incompatible. If you were to sink to the average depth of the ocean without protection, you'd be crushed long before you hit bottom. Light disappears within the first few 100 meters. Sound behaves differently. Gravity still pulls, but orientation dissolves. Up and down become ideas, not directions. And this incompatibility breeds avoidance. Our brains, in their gentle stubbornness, prefer to focus on what they can grasp. The deep sea? It slips away, not just from view, but from comprehension. It's hard to fear something you can't define, and harder still to feel ownership of something you can't inhabit. That's why, perhaps, we often speak of the ocean in halves. The one we know, surface waters, fishing boats, sunsets on the waves, and the one we don't. The shallow is our playground. The deep is another world entirely. Still, we dream about it. We dream about what might be living down there, about creatures that evolved in isolation, untouched by sun or storm. We imagine ecosystems that glow, that drift, that wait in the slow pulse of geological time. We speculate about shipwrecks carrying ancient cargo, about vents that breathe minerals like breath, about tectonic scars and sunken plains that tell stories no one has heard in 100 million years. Because for all its darkness, the deep sea isn't empty. It's teeming. We just can't see it. Yet. And maybe that's the most tantalizing part of all. The idea that the unknown still exists. That in a world where nearly everything feels mapped, measured, reviewed and posted, there are still places that resist being pinned down. The deep ocean keeps its secrets not out of malice, but out of silence. And in a strange way, that silence feels generous, as if it's waiting, as if it's saying, when you're ready, I'll be here. We sometimes think of exploration as a conquest, flags, footprints, frontiers crossed, but the deep sea doesn't yield to that kind of ambition. It doesn't resist, it doesn't welcome, it just is. Vast, cold, patient, waiting for us to slow down enough to listen. And there's something comforting about that. In a world that moves faster every day, the deep sea is timeless. Not in a magical way, but in a geological, ancient way. It doesn't care about our schedules. It doesn't rush. It has been here longer than our languages, our maps, our myths, and it will likely remain long after we're gone. So when you think about why we haven't explored it, consider this. Maybe the sea isn't holding back. Maybe we are. And not out of laziness or oversight, but because the mind, like the body, has its depths. And some depths aren't crossed quickly. They must be drifted into, gradually, respectfully, with wide eyes and quiet hearts. So next time you're near the sea, maybe at the shore, or even just hearing a recording of waves, pause, not for what's visible, but for what isn't. Not for what you can name, but for what you can almost feel. That gentle pull beneath the surface, that mystery you can't quite define. That's the deep sea. Not just water, not just pressure, but the part of our world that reminds us. Discovery isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, and maybe that's why it remains unexplored. Long before sonar scans and titanium submersibles, before the words deep sea ever floated through a lecture hall, humans looked out over the ocean and imagined. We didn't just wonder what was out there, we storied it. The sea, especially the unseen part beneath it, wasn't considered empty. It was full, sometimes benevolent, often dangerous, always sacred. And in nearly every ancient culture, the deeper you went, the stranger and more powerful things became. In the myths of Mesopotamia, the ocean was Tiamat, a vast primordial goddess of salt water and chaos. She wasn't just the sea, she was the raw matter of creation. Her body, after a divine battle, was said to have been split to form the sky and the earth. The deep wasn't just where life began, it was life before it knew what form to take. The Greeks had their own abyss. The deep ocean was the domain of Oceanus, an ancient river encircling the world, and later of Poseidon. Unpredictable, violent, commanding. Sailors told stories not only of storms but of creatures that pulled ships down. There were sirens, of course, but also whirlpools that seemed alive, krakens that surfaced from nowhere, and gods whose moods could drown cities. The Norse told tales of Jörmungandr, the world's serpent, so massive it encircled the earth and grasped its own tail. It lived beneath the sea, coiled in shadow. Its stirring would bring about the end of the world. To imagine the deep in their cosmology was to imagine time folded, waiting to snap. In Polynesian traditions, the sea was a relative, an ancestor. The stories often involve voyaging and discovery, yes, but also reverence. The ocean was not to be explored as much as consulted, respected, sung to. And within its depths lived spirits, some playful, others fierce, but none indifferent. Indigenous Australian peoples tell of the rainbow serpent, not always oceanic, but deeply tied to water, to flow, to creation. Its movement shaped landscapes. In some versions of the story, the waters it dwells in are far below, subterranean, submerged, sacred. And in Japan, tales of umibozu, sea monks, told of ghostly figures that would appear on calm seas, capsize ships without warning, and vanish into the fog. These stories weren't told to explain specific sightings. They were reminders. The ocean listens. The deep, especially, remembers. In all these myths, the deep sea is more than a setting. It's a force, and almost always it is layered with meaning. The unconscious, the past, the divine, the dangerous, the origin of all things. It was not understood, but it was felt. Profoundly. Even in more recent centuries, as human societies became more scientifically curious, the stories never fully disappeared. Instead, they transformed. In the Middle Ages, maps labelled the edge of the known seas with "Here be dragons." Cartographers filled blank spaces with tentacled beasts, or great whales that could swallow entire vessels. This wasn't just creative flair, it was a placeholder for anxiety. Where knowledge stopped, imagination surged forward. Some thought the ocean simply dropped off. Others imagined underwater continents, Atlantis being the most famous, populated with advanced civilizations that slipped beneath the waves in punishment or pride. By the 19th century, as the age of sail gave way to the age of steam, the mysteries of the ocean seemed more tantalizing than ever. Jules Verne wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1870. A work of fiction, yes, but one that reflected a very real obsession. What lies beneath? His submarine, the Nautilus, was powered by futuristic technology, yes, But what made the story so magnetic was the world it travelled through. Glowing jellyfish, sunken cities, deep trenches and crushing darkness. The sea was not just backdrop. It was a character, indifferent, enigmatic, beautiful. And while science began taking its first tentative steps toward real exploration, the cultural metaphors never stopped. The deep ocean became a mirror for the mind, especially the unconscious. Freud, in the early 20th century, likened the psyche to an iceberg. What is visible is small. What lies beneath? Vast. Later psychologists adopted the metaphor too. The ocean became our inner self, hidden, murky, slow-moving. Poets followed suit. T.S. Eliot, Sylvia Plath and Pablo Neruda all wrote of the sea as both metaphor and mystery, something eternal, something inside us. The deep wasn't just a location, it was a feeling. And music. Oh, music has always known the sea. Sea shanties gave rhythm to labour, yes, but they also carried warnings. Folk songs told of lovers lost to the waves. Ballads described sailors driven mad by the endless flat horizon. Even lullabies, quiet songs for sleep, often carry ocean imagery, waves, depth, the sense of being rocked by something older than memory. But here's the interesting thing. As our science improved, as our instruments grew more precise, our metaphors didn't vanish. They just shifted. Today, when we talk about depth, we still mean more than distance. We speak of deep truths, deep thoughts, deep emotions. The ocean has imprinted itself on our language. Unfathomable, a word now used for the complex or the surreal, literally comes from how many arms lengths of rope it takes to reach the sea floor. Plumbing the depths doesn't mean sinking a vessel. It means searching the soul. And when we say something is oceanic, we don't just mean vast. We mean it overwhelms us with beauty, with fear, with meaning. That's the legacy of the deep sea in human history, not just as a physical place, but as a canvas for wonder. And that matters, because how we feel about a place influences how we approach it. We didn't explore the ocean the same way we did the land. We revered it, we feared it, we sang to it. And even now, with all our tools and training and technology, that reverence lingers. It's why the deep sea remains one of the last places on Earth where mystery is allowed to live. Consider this. When we send a robot to Mars, we call it a rover. It explores, it scouts, it sends back data. But when we send a probe to the bottom of the ocean, we often call it a descent. Same goal, different emotion. Down there we descend. As if into ourselves. Our ancestors may not have had pressure gauges or deep-sea cameras, but they had something else, a kind of spiritual sonar. They sensed what modern science would confirm, that the ocean's depths are not empty. They are unreached. And in that reaching we've always brought more than gear. We bring myth, memory, longing. Even now, in our so-called age of certainty, we dream of Atlantis. We build entire ecosystems in video games around submerged cities. We write films about sea creatures rising. We fill novels with submarines searching for relics and ruins. We turn our aquariums into quiet temples where people stand in front of dark blue glass and stare. Not at fish, really, but at the feeling the deep awakens. And isn't that something? That despite centuries of science, we still stand where our ancestors stood, at the edge of the sea, wondering, still whispering stories into the dark, still listening for answers in the hush between waves. It's easy to say the deep sea remains unexplored because it's difficult to reach, because of technology, because of funding, because of logistics. But maybe, just maybe, it's also because part of us doesn't want to map it entirely. Maybe we need places that remain mythic, not because we fear them, but because we love them in a way that logic alone cannot contain. Because what is the deep ocean, if not the original story? The first frontier, the last sacred space that refuses to be fully tamed. We've looked to the sky and found mathematics. We've looked to the atom and found uncertainty. But when we look into the ocean, we find ourselves, our past, our fears, our dreams. And for all our progress, maybe that's something we're not quite ready to let go of. Not yet. Let's drift now from myth into method, from imagination into investigation. Because while the deep sea may stir stories in the soul, it also presents very real challenges to the body, the machine, and the mind. First, we need to understand what we're actually talking about when we say deep sea. The ocean isn't one vast, undifferentiated space. It's layered. Like a slow descent into nightfall, each level grows stranger, darker, and more removed from the world we know. At the top there's the epipelagic zone, the sunlit layer, where light still dances and photosynthesis keeps ecosystems buzzing. This is where we swim, fish, sail, and dream. Below that, from about 200 to 1,000 meters, lies the mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone. Sunlight fades, temperatures drop. Many fish here have large, sensitive eyes. Some flash with bioluminescence, soft pulses of blue and green like fireflies drifting through a storm. Then comes the bathypelagic zone, or midnight zone, 1,000 to 4,000 meters deep. No sunlight reaches here, it's cold, nearly freezing. Pressure builds to over 5,500 pounds per square inch. That's like stacking an elephant on every square inch of your skin. Life here moves slowly. Creatures drift in the darkness, adapted not for speed, but for survival. And still, we go deeper. The abyssopelagic zone spans from 4,000 to 6,000 meters. Here, temperatures hover near freezing. Food is scarce. Many animals live off marine snow, a constant drift of dead plankton, fish scales, fecal pellets, and decaying matter falling from above. It's a quiet feast, slow and steady, like dust settling in a forgotten attic. Below even this lies the Hadal zone, the trenches. These are the deepest parts of the ocean, found in narrow, steep valleys formed by tectonic activity. They plunge to depths of 11,000 meters or more, deeper than Mount Everest is tall, and we have explored less than 1% of them. It's here, in the Hadal zone, that the ocean becomes almost mythic again. Not because it's supernatural, but because the difficulty of reaching it makes every observation feel miraculous. So why haven't we explored it more? Let's start with the most obvious answer: pressure. At sea level, we live under 1 atmosphere of pressure, the weight of the air above us. But for every 10 meters you descend underwater, that pressure increases by another atmosphere. By the time you reach 1,000 meters, still well above the abyss, the pressure is 100 times greater than at the surface. It's not just uncomfortable, it's lethal. The human body is simply not built for those conditions. Our lungs would collapse, our tissues would compress, our senses would fail. And so, we build machines. But pressure doesn't just affect people, it crushes steel, deforms glass, short-circuits electronics. Designing vehicles that can survive, let alone function, in the deep sea is a feat of extraordinary engineering. Take the DSV Alvin, one of the most famous deep-sea submersibles. It's been in service since the 1960s, operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Alvin can dive to about 4,500 meters. It has carried scientists to hydrothermal vents, discovered new species, and even explored the wreck of the Titanic. But its passenger sphere, where the scientists sit, is just big enough for 3 people. Its titanium walls are nearly 7 inches thick, and it takes hours to descend and return, all for just a few precious hours of observation at depth. Only a handful of vessels on Earth can go deeper. The Trieste in 1960 carried Jacques Picard and Don Walsh to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, a journey that took nearly 5 hours down, 20 minutes on the seafloor, and 3 hours back up. The Deep Sea Challenger, piloted by James Cameron in 2012, made a solo dive to the same trench with more modern instrumentation. And then there's the limiting factor, a relatively recent vehicle designed to repeatedly explore the deepest parts of the ocean. It's small, expensive, remarkable. But here's the thing, all of these are exceptions. Most oceanographic research doesn't involve people in submersibles. It uses remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs. Machines controlled from ships or pre-programmed to roam and return. Still, even these have limitations. Cameras and sensors must be pressure resistant. Communication through water is slow and unreliable. Radio waves barely travel, so we rely on sound waves and tethers. Battery life is finite. Currents can push machines off course, and the ocean, vast as it is, rarely cooperates with neat paths. It's like trying to explore a pitch-black cave system with a flickering flashlight while wearing gloves inside a diving bell, and doing it all by remote control. But pressure isn't the only barrier. There's also temperature. Most of the deep ocean hovers just above freezing, around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. Electronics must be insulated, materials become brittle, oil thickens, batteries drain more quickly. Even simple tasks, like keeping a robotic arm flexible, become major engineering puzzles. Then there's darkness. Sunlight fades completely after about 1,000 meters. Below that there is no day or night, only shadow. Cameras require artificial light, but artificial light scares away many organisms. If you want to observe behavior naturally, you need infrared cameras, red light filters, or total patience. And patience comes at a cost. A single deep-sea expedition, renting a ship, operating a submersible, hiring crew and scientists, can cost millions of dollars. And unlike space missions which benefit from massive international investment, ocean research is often underfunded, overlooked, or split between dozens of smaller institutions. The result? We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the seafloor of our own planet. That's not poetic exaggeration. Mars has been mapped in high resolution, down to meters in detail. The deep ocean? Only about 25% of the ocean floor has been mapped using modern sonar. The rest is vague, broad outlines gathered from satellite altimetry, which measures sea level to infer what's beneath. It's like guessing the shape of furniture in a room based on how the carpet rises and falls. And while satellite data is invaluable, it can't replace in situ exploration. You can't study ecosystems, collect samples, or observe behavior from orbit. Which brings us to another point: visibility. In the deep sea, visibility isn't just low. It's a paradox. You need light to see, but light changes behavior. Many deep-sea creatures are adapted to total darkness. They don't have eyes, or they do, but they're sensitive to tiny flashes of bioluminescence, not the harsh glare of halogen lamps. Imagine you're trying to observe deer in a forest, but every time you look, you shine a spotlight in their eyes. You wouldn't see much, not as it truly is. The deep is similar. The more you try to illuminate it, the more it hides. Some researchers have turned to stealth methods, red light imaging, passive acoustics, soft glow LED sensors, to reduce disturbance. Others build landers, small platforms dropped from ships that settle on the seafloor and film whatever passes by. These tools are improving, but the pace is slow, and the ocean, vast as it is, demands both scale and subtlety. And then there's the final challenge, one that is rarely mentioned in headlines, but perhaps matters most: time. The ocean is in constant motion. Tides rise and fall, currents shift, nutrient plumes drift for days before dispersing. Events happen slowly or suddenly, but either way they're easy to miss. To truly understand the deep sea, we can't just drop in and take a snapshot, we have to stay. But staying, stationing instruments, maintaining equipment, monitoring long-term patterns is incredibly difficult. Salt corrodes, batteries fail, cables snap, algae grow, animals tamper, and still, the sea moves. So most of what we know comes from brief visits, glimpses, hours-long descents that capture only what happens in front of a camera on a specific day in a specific place, and in between, silence. But the sea keeps going, with or without us. And still, despite the barriers, pressure, cold, cost, time, we return. Why? Because every time we do, the ocean answers with something we didn't expect. A new species, a stranger behaviour, an entire ecosystem that rewrites what we thought life could be. One of the most dramatic examples came in the late 1970s near the Galapagos Rift. Scientists using Alvin discovered something entirely unpredicted: hydrothermal vents. Chimneys of mineral-rich water gushing up from beneath the Earth's crust at temperatures over 350 degrees Celsius. Surrounding these vents, life, not drifting down from the surface, not surviving on the trickle of dead plankton, but thriving, entirely independent of sunlight. These creatures, giant tube worms, blind shrimps, sulfur-eating bacteria, lived in a world lit not by photons but by chemistry. The implications were enormous. Until then, we believed all ecosystems on Earth ultimately depended on the sun. Here was proof they didn't have to, and if life could thrive in total darkness, in crushing pressure, feeding off volcanic gases, then maybe, just maybe, it could exist in other extreme environments too, on Europa beneath its icy crust, on Enceladus in its subsurface seas, even in the ancient oceans of Mars long since frozen. Suddenly the deep sea wasn't just about Earth anymore. It became a model, a metaphor, a proving ground for what life might look like elsewhere. And yet we've barely begun to catalogue it. Each time we descend, we find species we've never seen before. Not one or two, dozens, sometimes hundreds. Pale, slow-moving animals with delicate forms and bizarre anatomies. Fish with transparent skin, squid with elbows, jellyfish that shimmer and fold like galaxies. We name them sometimes, photograph them, collect a few samples, but mostly we marvel, and then we ascend carrying only a tiny piece of what the ocean showed us. We think of exploration as conquest, of taking, of claiming, of completing, but the deep sea resists that. It gives nothing easily, and what it does offer feels less like a prize and more like a gift. Still, not all surprises are gentle. In recent years, the deep sea has become the subject of growing industrial interest. Companies and nations have begun looking toward deep-sea mining, harvesting the mineral-rich nodules and crusts that coat parts of the seafloor. Cobalt, manganese, rare earth metals, all essential for electronics, batteries, renewable energy. It's tempting. The ocean floor contains vast, untapped resources, and compared to terrestrial mining, it promises no human displacement, no surface scarring, no visible harm. But the deep is not empty. Its ecosystems are slow to grow, slow to recover. Many species live only in specific locations, a single ridge, a single vent, a single depth range. Disturb that, and you risk erasing life that took millions of years to evolve, life we may not even know exists. And recovery, if it happens at all, might take centuries. That's the dilemma of modern ocean science. We want to learn, to protect, to preserve, but we also want to use, and the line between curiosity and consumption is thinner than we'd like to admit. So scientists race to study what's down there, to understand it, to argue for caution, because in many ways this is our last chance to explore the deep sea before we change it forever. And yet, the deep doesn't hurry. It continues at its own pace, layered in silt, pulsing in currents, echoing in whale song and tectonic tremor. And we, these land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures, we keep building better tools, smarter drones, more sensitive sensors, underwater observatories that can rest on the seafloor for months, even years, cameras that can see without startling, ROVs that can glide instead of crash. We're not just descending anymore, we're listening. There's even a growing movement called deep sea stewardship. Scientists, ethicists, and explorers working together to establish frameworks for how we interact with the ocean's depths. It's not just about exploration now, it's about responsibility, because the deep sea isn't waiting to be conquered. It's not a frontier, it's not a resource, it's a realm. And like any ancient place, it deserves reverence. We're beginning to understand that, slowly. There are initiatives now to map the entire seafloor by 2030, part of the Seabed 2030 project, an international collaboration aiming to combine sonar data, public charts, and new expeditions into a global, high-resolution map of the ocean floor. Not just for curiosity, but for safety, understanding tsunami risk, submarine cables, climate modelling, fish migration, conservation, but also for wonder. Because mapping is just the start. The ocean doesn't yield its secrets to GPS. You can draw the trench, but to know it you must go. And that's the most beautiful and difficult part of all this. That every piece of the ocean we explore reveals another layer we haven't. That each descent is both an answer and a question. That the closer we get to understanding, the more mystery blooms. The deep sea remains unexplored, not because we are careless, but because the scale of the unknown is simply that great. Because the barriers are not only physical, but philosophical. What does it mean to explore something you cannot see? To measure something that shifts beneath your tools? To respect something you may never fully understand? These aren't technical questions, they're human ones, and as our machines grow stronger, able to dive deeper, stay longer, see more clearly, it becomes not just a test of engineering, but of character. What kind of explorers will we be? Will we rush, extract, flatten the unknown into the familiar? Or will we pause, float, wait, listen? Because the ocean doesn't mind our curiosity. It's vast enough to hold it, but it asks for humility. And maybe, in return, it offers something even greater than knowledge. It offers awe. If the ocean were a story, the deep sea would be its most haunting chapter, not a climax, not a conclusion, but that long, silent pause in the middle, where the plot slows, the light dims, and the reader leans in to catch a whisper of something vast. By this point, we've mapped out the barriers, the crushing pressure, the constant cold, the invisible darkness. But those are just the boundaries. Within them lies a whole other planet, not in some distant solar system. Right here, just beneath our feet, or more accurately beneath our boats, exists a biosphere that challenges nearly everything we thought we knew about life. Let's begin with mechanism, how life functions in such extremes. At the surface, sunlight is the engine. Plants take in photons, convert them to sugars, and pass energy along the food chain. But in the deep, where sunlight never reaches, that model falls apart, and yet life goes on. It turns out not all life needs the sun. In the 1970s, scientists discovered chemosynthesis, a process by which microbes convert chemicals from Earth's interior, like hydrogen sulfide, into energy. These microbes form the base of an entirely different food web, one that exists not because of sunlight, but in spite of its absence. These microbes gather around hydrothermal vents, cracks in the seafloor where superheated water, rich in minerals, gushes up from the Earth's mantle. Around these vents thrive ecosystems so alien that at first scientists didn't know what to make of them. Imagine towering chimney-like structures, called black smokers, spewing dark plumes of mineral-laden water, and clustered around them, dense fields of giant tube worms, some up to 8 feet tall, with no mouths or stomachs. Instead, they host symbiotic bacteria inside their tissues, which produce food from the vent chemicals. Nearby, pale crabs with hairy pincers, blind shrimp with heat-sensing organs, fish that glide through currents of heat and cold in a kind of silent ballet. There's no sunlight, no photosynthesis, and yet life thrives. This is not an exception. This is a parallel reality, one we almost missed entirely. These vent ecosystems don't just rewrite biology textbooks, they reframe our understanding of where life can exist, and possibly where it began. Some scientists believe early Earth may have hosted its first life around hydrothermal vents. Here, in chemical-rich water, protected from meteor bombardment and UV radiation, life could have taken hold. And if that's true, then places like this may also exist on other worlds: Europa, Enceladus, even ancient Mars. In that sense, the deep sea becomes not just a frontier of biology, but a model for exobiology, the study of life beyond Earth. But let's move on, because not all deep-sea ecosystems cluster around vents. Some lie near cold seeps, areas where methane and hydrogen sulfide slowly seep from the seabed. These are quieter than vents, more stable, often surrounded by mussels and clams that, again, rely on bacterial symbiosis. Unlike the violent energy of a vent, a seep is more like a slow, steady heartbeat, and yet it still nourishes life in the dark. Elsewhere on the abyssal plain, where there's no chemical feast, organisms survive off marine snow, a gentle rain of organic material falling from above. It's mostly detritus, dead plankton, feces, fragments of decaying jellyfish. A kind of cosmic compost that sinks slowly, feeding scavengers and filter feeders alike. The word snow is oddly poetic here. In the quiet of the deep, it does resemble snowfall, light, slow, constant, and somehow peaceful. But the creatures that feed on it are anything but ordinary. There's the sea cucumber, which slowly inches along the seafloor, vacuuming up sediment. Some glow. Others walk on stilts made of bone. A few can eject their internal organs as a defense, and then grow them back. There are polychaete worms with iridescent bristles, cusk eels that look like shadowy ribbons, and glass sponges whose bodies form delicate latticeworks that rival cathedral windows, and scattered among them, predators. The gulper eel, with a mouth so large it can engulf prey its own size. The anglerfish, famous for its bioluminescent lure. The vampire squid, which is neither vampire nor squid, and spends its life floating in the oxygen minimum zone, conserving energy, trailing its cloak-like webbed arms behind it. Every single one of these creatures has evolved in response to scarcity, to pressure, to darkness. They are not primitive, they are perfectly specialized, in a way more adapted to their world than we are to ours. But their world is slow. Many deep-sea species live for decades. Some, like certain deep-sea corals, for centuries. The Greenland shark, a sluggish giant that inhabits the Arctic deep, may live over 400 years. It reaches maturity at around 150. This slowness is not a flaw. It's a feature. In a world where food is rare, growth must be measured, movement must be efficient, and reproduction infrequent but resilient. Which leads us to a strange paradox. The deep sea is one of the most stable environments on Earth. Temperatures vary little, light is absent, seasons do not shift. The terrain changes only over millennia. And yet, it is also one of the most vulnerable. Because in such stability, life becomes delicate. A trawler dragging across the seafloor may destroy centuries of coral growth in minutes. A mining operation may cloud the water with sediment, choking filter feeders for miles. An oil spill, though far above, may sink slowly, reaching the depths like a toxic snow. And recovery in this realm of slow motion can take centuries or never happen at all. We often think of the deep sea as rugged, but it's more accurate to say it's persistent, not resistant to harm, just unused to it. So when scientists study these ecosystems, they do so with a kind of reverence. The data must be gathered, yes, but gently, respectfully. The very act of observation can disturb, lights can disrupt behavior, noise can confuse navigation. Our presence, even well-intentioned, leaves ripples, and that's not even getting into anomalies, because just when we think we understand the rules of the deep, the deep changes them. There are strange zones called brine pools, depressions filled with highly saline water, denser than the surrounding ocean. These pools don't mix with the seawater around them. They form lakes within the ocean, complete with shorelines, waves, and reflective surfaces. To a robotic camera, they appear surreal, like a mirror resting on the seafloor. And life? It gathers at the edges, just like it does at ponds above ground. Elsewhere, there are mud volcanoes, methane clathrate fields, and carbon seeps. Some host entire forests of tube worms. Others seem barren, but pulse with microbial life too small to see. There are also extinct vent fields, once vibrant, now quiet. Their chimneys remain like ghost towns of the abyss. Scientists study them to learn how ecosystems age, collapse, and, sometimes, recover. And then there are sounds. The ocean is not silent, even at depth. Hydrophones pick up distant earthquakes, blue whale calls, strange croaks from unknown creatures, even mysterious booms and hums that science can't yet explain. These sounds travel vast distances. Sound moves faster in water than in air, and sometimes arrive with no clear source. We give them names: the bloop, Julia, upsweep. We catalogue them, speculate, and wait. Because the ocean is patient, and perhaps the most fascinating thing of all. We're not the only explorers down there. Recent studies have found that sharks, sperm whales, and even elephant seals dive to extreme depths, not just occasionally, but as part of their routine lives. Sperm whales hunt squid a mile below the surface. Elephant seals dive deep and long to feed, using echolocation to sense prey in the dark. These animals are navigating a world we can barely reach, with senses we barely comprehend. What do they see? What do they hear? We don't know, but we're starting to ask the right questions. So what else is down there, just beyond the reach of our lights and nets and quietly humming machines? Let's return to the subject of anomalies, edge cases and outliers, the strange corners of biology that exist because they can, not because they make sense at first glance. In the deep sea, gigantism often emerges. Creatures grow to sizes that seem almost fictional, not monstrous, but massive in calm, deliberate ways. The giant isopod, a relative of the pillbug, scuttles along the seafloor with armoured plates and unhurried patience, as if it's guarding some ancient secret. The colossal squid, with eyes the size of dinner plates and tentacles lined with swivelling hooks, lives far deeper than its better-known cousin, the giant squid. It is rarely seen, but evidence of its existence, scarred sperm whales, mysterious beaks in bellies, keeps turning up like sea-borne clues. Scientists believe deep-sea gigantism may result from a mix of cold temperatures, slow metabolisms, low predation pressure, and the need to travel long distances in search of scarce food. It's not a flourish, it's an adaptation. Everything in the deep sea is. At the other extreme, miniaturization occurs too. Tiny organisms with fragile bodies float in the midwater like punctuation marks between sentences. Lavaceans, for instance, build intricate mucus houses many times their size, filtering particles from the water only to abandon them once clogged. They construct, discard, and begin again, a life of repetition that mirrors the drifting pace of the ocean itself. There's also the barrel-leaf fish, a creature that looks like it stepped out of an unrendered video game, with a transparent head, tubular eyes that rotate within its skull, and a mouth that almost seems like an afterthought. It floats in the dark, passively watching for silhouettes above. Its strange form doesn't break any rules. It's simply tailored to an environment where survival looks nothing like it does on land. And while these animals appear alien, the processes that shape them are deeply earthbound. Evolution, resource limitation, pressure, light. They are born from physics and persistence. Then there's the matter of behaviour, how deep-sea organisms move, feed, reproduce, and interact in a world where the rules are different. Some migrate vertically, rising hundreds of meters at night to feed in the mesopelagic zone, then sinking back by day. This daily journey, made by trillions of tiny animals, is the largest migration on Earth, and it happens in silence, unnoticed every night. Others remain still their entire lives, attached to rocks or drifting slowly in currents. There are deep-sea octopuses that brood their eggs for years, not weeks, not months, but years. One was observed guarding her clutch for over 4 years, never leaving, never feeding, until the moment they hatched. A devotion measured in darkness and time. Some fish use sonar-like pulses, some rely on scent trails, and others use subtle glows, signals in blue and green, invisible to human eyes, but perfectly clear in the language of the abyss. Reproduction too takes on new forms. For anglerfish, the most famous example might also be the strangest. In many species, the male is tiny, a fraction the size of the female. When he finds a mate, he bites her side, fuses to her body, and spends the rest of his life as a kind of living appendage, sharing blood, surrendering autonomy. It's not romance, it's survival. These aren't rare exceptions. In the deep sea, this is biology. Quiet, strange, efficient, and wholly indifferent to what we consider normal. And yet, for all this elegance and adaptation, there are things we still don't understand. We don't know how many species live down there. New ones are found every time we look, sometimes entire genera, even families, previously unknown. We estimate millions of species remain undescribed. We don't fully understand how deep currents operate. Some flow like rivers within the ocean, carrying nutrients, larvae, heat, but they're hard to track. Instruments drift, models fall short. We don't know how changes on the surface, warming temperatures, plastic pollution, acidification, are altering life at depth. Some effects are slow, others sudden. We've found microplastics in the guts of amphipods from the Mariana Trench. Oil from spills in the Gulf of Mexico settled into sediments thousands of meters down. The deep is no longer untouched, just undermeasured, and we've only begun to understand how crucial the deep sea is to the planet as a whole. It plays a massive role in carbon cycling, storing organic carbon that sinks from above, burying it in sediments. Some of this carbon stays trapped for thousands, even millions of years, helping regulate Earth's climate. Disrupt these processes, and the consequences ripple outward, slowly, quietly, but globally. So when we ask why the deep sea remains unexplored, the answer is not just about access, it's about complexity, about the sheer scale of what remains, about the humility it takes to admit we know less than we think, and yet we are trying. In recent years, technological advances have begun to open doors once sealed shut. There are autonomous underwater vehicles now that can map the seafloor in exquisite detail, using multi-beam sonar arrays that sweep the landscape like digital brushes. Some can descend for days, scanning valleys and ridges with the patience of tide. There are cabled observatories fixed to the seafloor, streaming data in real time, temperature, chemistry, biological activity, seismic shifts. These quiet stations become the ocean's voice, whispering to satellites above. There are DNA samplers that collect environmental traces, bits of skin, scales, cells, left behind in the water, allowing researchers to map biodiversity without ever seeing the animals directly. There are collaborations now between nations, between scientists and artists, engineers and storytellers, all working to bring the deep sea into human view, not to conquer, but to understand. And there are new philosophies taking shape. That exploration doesn't mean domination. That presence should not mean disruption. That knowledge and care can coexist. A new kind of exploration is emerging, one shaped not by the flags we plant, but by the footprints we don't leave behind. Because the deep doesn't need to be claimed. It needs to be remembered. And maybe that's why, after all these centuries, it still draws us in. not because we expect answers, but because it reminds us that some questions, the good ones, take time and silence, and looking into the dark, not with fear, but with reverence. The ocean doesn't resist us. It simply waits for us to go slowly. And perhaps that's the lesson it's been offering all along. Long before we dreamed of submersibles or sonar, before charts and coordinates, long before we gave names to trenches and ridges, humans stood at the edge of the ocean and tried to imagine what was beneath. They didn't call it science then. They called it survival, or ritual, or the will of the gods. But even in those early moments, stone tools in hand, driftwood at their feet, there was already a kind of hypothesis forming. Something is down there. Something moves. For much of human history, the ocean's surface was the only part we knew. We sailed it, fished it, sang about it. But the deep? That was another matter entirely. It was as distant to us as the moon, and in many ways far less inviting. The ancient Greeks believed the sea held great monsters, not metaphorically but literally. Their earlier scholars, like Aristotle, catalogued marine life with care, but his classifications only went as far as the visible, the accessible. The rest they left to myth. It wasn't ignorance, it was humility. Even the Romans, expert engineers that they were, never dove far. They used divers for sponge harvesting, yes, but never beyond what breath and muscle could carry. They called the deep mare tenebrosum, the dark sea, a place of mystery, of endings. In the Middle Ages, maps of the world often ended where the ocean began. The deep wasn't a destination, it was a border. And then came the age of sails, and curiosity grew. By the 15th and 16th centuries, explorers were crossing oceans. Ships carved paths through the unknown, and the idea of mapping the sea became more than a fantasy. But still, it was the surface we mapped. Depth remained a whisper. The first attempts to measure the ocean's depth were laughably simple by modern standards. A rope with a rock tied to the end. Sailors would lower it over the side, let it sink until slack, then haul it back in and measure how much line had disappeared. This was the birth of sounding, a method still used in more advanced forms today. Of course, this only worked in shallow coastal waters. Once ships moved into the open sea, the rope ran out long before it touched bottom. And so, the deep remained deep, not in numbers, but in mystery. Then, in the 19th century, something changed. In 1840, the British ship HMS Beagle, yes, the same one that carried Charles Darwin, took one of the earliest deep-sea soundings in the South Atlantic. Using over 2,000 fathoms of rope, they estimated the depth at over 3,800 metres. The line nearly vanished, and yet something had been touched. The idea that the ocean could be measured even crudely took hold. But the real turning point came with the HMS Challenger expedition. Launched in 1872, the Challenger was a repurposed warship, outfitted with scientific instruments and a singular goal: to explore the deep ocean. Over nearly 4 years, it travelled 70,000 nautical miles, sampled seawater, collected marine specimens, and most crucially, measured depth. They used weighted lines and thermometers, dredges and nets, crude by today's standards, but revolutionary at the time. They discovered the Mariana Trench, the world's deepest known point. They catalogued over 4,000 new species. They proved, definitively, that life could exist at extreme depths. Until then, many scientists had believed that beyond a few hundred meters, the sea was lifeless, too cold, too dark, too pressurized. The Challenger changed that. It didn't just expand our knowledge, it redefined it. Its findings filled 50 volumes and inspired generations. In the early 20th century, technology began to catch up with curiosity. Echo sounding, the use of sound waves to measure depth, replaced ropes and weights. The German ship Meteor used this method in the 1920s to chart the Atlantic. Suddenly, we weren't just sampling, we were mapping. In 1930, humans made their first true descent into the deep. American engineer William Beebe, along with Otis Barton, created the bathysphere, a spherical steel chamber tethered to a ship by a cable, with a tiny window and almost no room to move. They were lowered off the coast of Bermuda, descending to over 900 meters, a record at the time. What they saw was staggering. Luminescent creatures, strange gelatinous shapes, eyes that glowed and bodies that shimmered. Beebe later described it as a dreamlike descent into space. The bathysphere could go down, but not steer. It had no light of its own and no life support beyond thick glass and bravery. Still, it marked the beginning of human entry into the deep. In the 1950s, Swiss physicist Auguste Piccard and his son Jacques developed the bathyscaphe, a free-diving submersible that wasn't tethered, but instead carried its own ballast and buoyancy system. In 1960, Jacques Piccard and American Navy officer Don Walsh entered the Trieste and descended to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11,000 meters deep. It was the deepest dive in human history. Down there, they reported seeing a flatfish, although this has been debated. Still, the point was clear. The deepest ocean was reachable. Not hospitable, perhaps, but reachable. And yet, after that, for decades, little else happened at that depth. The Cold War shifted attention to space. Funding drifted upward. The ocean, too close, too silent, was once again left in shadow. Still, quieter efforts continued. In the 1970s, Alvin, the US submersible, helped scientists discover hydrothermal vents. The 1980s saw advances in ROVs and towed camera systems. In the 1990s, the Japanese Shinkai 6500 and French Nautil continued exploring deep trenches. And then came the modern age, with James Cameron's 2012 solo dive in the Deep Sea Challenger, a sleek, torpedo-shaped submersible that reached the Mariana Trench again, this time with HD cameras and robotic arms. The first descent in over 50 years, a filmmaker returning with data. Since then, the limiting factor, a sub designed by American explorer Victor Vescovo, has made multiple dives to the deepest known parts of each ocean, not once, but many times, proving that repeat exploration is now possible. Each of these milestones marks a shift, not just in depth, but in intention. We're no longer just asking, can we reach it? We're asking, what lives there? How does it work? What does it mean? And we are beginning to find answers. We've learned about deep-sea currents, slow rivers of cold water that help regulate global climate. We've identified undersea volcanoes, earthquakes, trenches, and faults, geological structures that shape the continents above. We've traced the journey of carbon as it sinks from surface to seafloor, becoming food, becoming sediment, becoming storage for the atmosphere's breath. And we've realized, perhaps most importantly, that the ocean is not passive. It moves, it shapes, it remembers. Still, even with modern tools, satellite altimetry, multi-beam sonar, deep-sea rovers, only a fraction of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution, only a sliver of its biology has been studied, and almost none of it has been seen by human eyes. That's where we are now, at a strange middle point, where our tools can go farther, but our attention hasn't always followed, where the technology is outpacing the funding, where the mystery is still larger than the map. And yet, we go on. A new generation of scientists is rising, biologists, chemists, roboticists, even data analysts, working together to make sense of what the ocean still hides. Their work is not flashy, it's patient, it's slow, like the sea, and the story of our understanding is still unfolding. In a few decades, we've gone from rope lines and guesswork to robots that can film a jellyfish in 8K, a mile beneath the waves, without disturbing its gentle pulse. We've gone from myths of krakens to scientific papers on pressure-adapted enzymes, from silence to song. And that perhaps is the most astonishing part, that our desire to know, though often delayed, does not disappear. It only deepens. There is something about the deep sea that resists closure. We can catalogue species, sketch maps, plot currents and chemistry, and yet something remains untouched, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, as though the ocean's deepest regions occupy a place not only in geography, but in the folds of human thought. Not just what we haven't explored, but what we may never fully understand. It starts perhaps with a question so simple it becomes disarming. Why are we drawn to what we cannot reach? What is it about the abyss, not the danger, not the thrill, but the abyss itself that compels us to imagine? The deep sea is not just distant, it is beneath. It lives under pressure, under time, under light. It is the subconscious of the earth. And just as our own dreams defy easy explanation, so too does the sea resist full translation. It's no coincidence that so many thinkers, from Freud to Jung to mythologists and mystics, have compared the ocean to the unconscious. A vast churning mass of half-formed thoughts, of suppressed memories, of symbols with no stable key. We say, I'm drowning in work. Waves of emotion, drifting off, feeling unmoored. Our language knows, even when we don't, the sea is not just water, it's metaphor, it's mirror. And maybe that's why we've kept our distance for so long. Not because we lack the technology, but because some part of us isn't sure it wants to look too closely. Because when we look into the deep, we're not only looking out, we are looking in. There's a kind of vulnerability in that. Most frontiers present the illusion of control. The desert is harsh, yes, but visible. The mountain is high, but climbable. Space is distant, but lit by stars. The ocean, the deep ocean, it doesn't offer that comfort. You can be 2 miles above the seafloor and see nothing. You can sink for hours and reach only silence. You can arrive at the bottom and still not know what's around you, because even there, the visibility may be less than the length of your body. It doesn't matter how advanced our instruments become. Darkness, in the deep, is not an absence. It is a constant. And darkness, true, heavy, swallowing darkness, has a way of revealing not the world but the self. Perhaps that's why the ocean so often appears in our most existential stories. Think of Melville's Moby Dick, not just a novel about whales, but about obsession, about unknowability. The whale becomes a symbol not of evil, but of indifference. The ocean doesn't punish Ahab. It simply doesn't notice him. It doesn't care. And to many that is more terrifying than a monster, or the old man in the sea, where the sea is not an enemy but a companion, a place of trial, yes, but also of deep, silent beauty. The fish is caught, then lost, and yet something is won. Dignity, communion, a sense of having participated in something larger. These stories don't give us answers, they give us mirrors, and the ocean is full of those. Even our religions reflect this ambiguity. In many creation myths, the ocean is the first substance, formless, churning, waiting to be divided. In Hindu cosmology, Vishnu floats on the cosmic sea between the end of one universe and the beginning of another. In Genesis, the Spirit of God hovers over the waters before creating light. The sea, then, is not chaos. It's potential. It's the space before meaning. It's the unshaped story. And maybe that's what frightens us. Not the sea itself, but what it suggests. That meaning is not built in. That the world doesn't always narrate itself to us. That some places, some truths, simply are. Silent, expansive, unfinished. And yet, despite this, or maybe because of it, we return. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. We keep asking, what's down there? And more subtly, what does it say about us that we care? Because exploration is never just about what we find. It's about what we're willing to confront. Our hopes, our assumptions, our place. There are philosophers who argue that the deep sea, like space, is one of the last sacred domains, not because it is untouched, but because it remains unfolded. It has not yet been forced to make sense, and in that, it retains its otherness, and we need that, don't we? In a world mapped to the inch, priced by the acre, tagged and logged and labelled, we need places that can't be owned, places that defy metaphor, even as they attract it. The sea offers that paradox. It is knowable in pieces, but not whole, and in a strange way that makes it holy. Not in the religious sense necessarily, but in the original sense, set apart, worthy of awe. A place where we become smaller, not in shame, but in perspective. There's an ancient Japanese aesthetic called yugen. It describes a kind of profound grace, the subtle, mysterious beauty of the universe. It's not the beauty you explain, it's the beauty you feel but can't name. The sea is full of yugen. It doesn't perform for us, it doesn't explain itself. It simply exists in layers and flows and silences and pulses. It holds its secrets without malice, and occasionally it shares one. A jellyfish that glows like a galaxy, a sound that echoes without source, a trench that's deeper than we dreamed. And that's the heart of the philosophical tension. The sea is both invitation and refusal. It says, come closer, and then withholds. It shows just enough to deepen the question. It gives you a glimpse, and then closes the curtain. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we need most. Not closure, not conclusion, but humility. Because the deep sea reminds us that some things are not ours to hold. They are ours to honour. Even our best science struggles with this. Data demands certainty. Charts want endings. But the deep doesn't end. It just continues. And we are asked not to finish it, but to dwell in it, to listen, to ask better questions. What if the deep sea is not a puzzle, but a poem? What if it's not meant to be solved, but felt? What if the creatures that drift through the darkness are not just biology, but a kind of language? What if every glow, every glide, every soft undulation is a word in a sentence we don't yet speak? And what if the reason we've explored so little of it isn't just about cost or danger, but because it mirrors a part of us we're not ready to enter, the part without maps, the part without edges, the part that, like the sea, simply is. So when we talk about the future of ocean exploration, we might consider not just the questions we want to answer, but the ones we want to leave open, not out of apathy, but out of reverence. Because some mysteries deserve protection, some silences deserve to be kept, and the deep, ancient, patient, untamed, offers us the chance to relearn that, to trade conquest for wonder, to replace certainty with listening, to remember that not everything has to be seen to be real, that sometimes being in the dark is exactly where we're supposed to be. You've never been to the bottom of the ocean, but you felt it. Not the pressure maybe, not the cold, but something else, something slower, deeper, just beneath the surface of your own day. Because the deep sea, though distant, is not separate. It ripples into the rhythms of our lives in quiet, curious ways. Think, for a moment, about silence. When was the last time you truly heard it? Not the silence of an empty room, or the pause between conversations, but the long, patient silence that has no need to be filled. The kind of silence you might feel in the middle of the night, or in the woods after snowfall, or on a long walk by the coast, when even your thoughts begin to soften. That's the silence of the deep. It's not lonely, it's full of memory, of presence, of waiting. And somehow it echoes in us, not because we understand it, but because we recognize it, somewhere inside. There's a reason we use ocean metaphors for emotion. We talk about waves of grief, depths of sorrow, tides of longing. We say someone is drowning in work, lost at sea, adrift in their thoughts. These aren't just poetic turns, they're signals that somewhere, in our own inner oceans, we know what it means to feel submerged, and yet not all those feelings are heavy. Sometimes the sea is stillness, sometimes it's clarity. When you float in water, not swimming, just surrendering, your body is held, you're weightless, cradled. You can hear your own breath, the hush of bubbles. It's almost womb-like, restorative, and if you've ever fallen asleep in a warm bath or been lulled by the rocking of a boat, then you've touched a little of what the deep sea offers every day. Not fear, but calm. The ocean also lives in your rituals, the salt in your kitchen, the fish on your plate, the seaweed in your sushi, your shampoo, your soil, the weather you check, the air you breathe. Nearly half the oxygen on Earth is produced by marine phytoplankton, microscopic plants floating near the surface, invisible but essential. You've never seen them, and yet you breathe them in every few seconds. Their work becomes your breath, their rhythm becomes your day. Even sleep, the very act you're drifting into now, mirrors something oceanic. We descend, layer by layer, from wakefulness to drowsiness to dreaming, to the slow restorative pull of deep sleep. We don't leap, we sink, and at each level our awareness changes, time stretches, thought fragments. We become strange to ourselves, and then reassemble. Like a submersible descending into the abyss, we enter sleep not all at once, but in stages, each darker, each quieter, until we reach that still, hidden place, the part we don't remember but return from feeling whole, and when we wake, we rise again, slowly, gently. It's no coincidence that dreaming and drifting share the same linguistic flavour. The sea also shapes our stories. Fairy tales and legends, myths and movies. The ocean is everywhere. Think of the mermaid singing from the rocks, the kraken coiled in ancient maps, the sirens luring sailors with songs. These creatures don't live in shallow water. They come from depth, from mystery, from the place where imagination and darkness blend. Even modern films, think Finding Nemo, The Abyss, Moana, Life of Pi, The Shape of Water, use the sea not just as backdrop but as character. It teaches, it tests, it transforms. The deep sea becomes, over and over, a symbol of the unknown. Not something to be feared necessarily, but something to be engaged. Like an emotion you haven't named, a memory you can't quite reach. Children understand this, instinctively. You give them a bucket and a tide pool and suddenly they're marine biologists. Seaweed becomes treasure, shells become currency, crabs are chased, then freed. The whole shore becomes a lab, a kingdom, a poem, and in that way the sea invites play, exploration, wonder. But somewhere along the line we often forget that. The sea becomes backdrop, resource, vacation. It fades into wallpaper, and yet it keeps showing up. In fashion, in metaphors, in design. The blue of your screensaver, the soundtracks with whale song woven in, the art that uses waves as punctuation, the meditation apps that promise calm tides and ambient currents. Even when we're far from the coast, we crave it. Because the ocean, especially the deep, holds something we lack in our lives. Scale. It's bigger than us, older, less reactive. The deep sea doesn't care about our deadlines. It doesn't scroll. It doesn't refresh. It waits. And that waiting, that stillness, is increasingly rare. So it makes sense that we seek it out. In yoga classes named after waves. In breathing exercises that mimic the swell and fall of tide. In minimalist design that evokes marine clarity. We try to bring the ocean into our lives, not through conquest, but through invitation. Of course, not all connections are gentle. Our daily habits affect the deep in ways we don't always see. The plastic in a bottle cap might find its way to a trench. The carbon from your commute might warm the water above a coral reef. The shampoo you rinse off might carry microbeads that settle in sediment thousands of miles away. We don't do this maliciously. Often we don't know, but the sea, especially the deep sea, remembers, not in a conscious sense, but in accumulation, a slow, sedimentary kind of memory, layer upon layer, year upon year, building a story we're still learning to read. And so, as we continue to explore, with drones and data, sensors and submersibles, maybe we can also learn to listen, to see the deep not just as a place out there, but as a reflection of our daily choices, our inner climate, our collective mood. Because even as we sleep, the ocean moves, it circulates, it breathes, it absorbs, it holds. Your dreams tonight may never drift to the Mariana Trench or the hydrothermal vents of the East Pacific Rise, and yet, the chemistry that makes those places possible, pressure, silence, adaptation, is not so different from the chemistry of rest. Both require surrender, both invite quiet, and both ask, not for understanding, but for trust. So maybe the deep sea is not just out there, waiting to be explored. Maybe it's already within you, waiting to be felt, in your deepest exhale, in the moment just before sleep, in the place where thought begins to blur and the silence becomes not empty, but full. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we're drawn to it, even from afar, because it reminds us that we too have depth. Imagine for a moment that the ocean is not a place, but a door, a massive ancient threshold, not closed, not open, but waiting. And the deeper you go, the more that door shifts, not physically, but perceptually, as if space itself were stretching, as if the pressure doesn't just squeeze your body, but your understanding of reality. What if the deep sea isn't the final frontier of Earth, but the beginning of something else? Science fiction has long flirted with the sea, not as metaphor but as model, a living example of alien terrain right beneath our feet. Because really, what is the deep ocean but an alien world we can actually visit? Let's build a ship, not in steel and circuits, but in speculation. Let's descend. Pressure builds, light fades, sound thickens. The laws start to bend, ever so slightly. What if time runs differently down here? Not literally perhaps, but perceptually. Your heart rate slows, your thoughts too. Signals travel slower. Each moment stretches, not into boredom but into density. A minute here feels like an hour above. Would you age differently? Would your memories stack up with more weight? What if dreams in this place lasted longer? Now picture this. What if the creatures of the deep, the glowing siphonophores, the whispering squid, the blind fish that hover like commas, what if they're not just animals, but parts of something bigger, a distributed intelligence, not centralized like a brain, but collective, a network of bioluminescent pulses, slow chemical signals, silent migrations, all forming a kind of underwater cognition, not human, not machine, just oceanic. You wouldn't notice it right away. You'd see fish, jelly, flow. But if you stayed long enough, you might see a pattern, a pulse, a conversation. And maybe, just maybe, the pattern would begin to notice you. You might think, this is absurd. But ask yourself, how do you know a coral reef isn't thinking? Not in words, not in logic, but in structure, in shape, in scent. How do you know a trench isn't dreaming? What if the ocean, in all its layers and silence, is a kind of mind? And we, with our tools and terms, are the slow learners, poking the synapse with our probes, hoping it blinks back. What if deep-sea animals evolved not to adapt to pressure or darkness, but to transmit something, a signal, a memory, a map? What if the patterns of bioluminescence are not just camouflage or lure, but language, a syntax too vast for human timescales, a novel told in pulses across millennia, You could call this fantasy. But consider, octopuses change colour with their thoughts. Cuttlefish display shifting patterns that ripple like inked syntax. Squid communicate in flashing signals invisible to us. Skin-deep Morse code. If land creatures can do that, why not sea? And if light is scarce and sound carries far, wouldn't it make sense for the ocean's true messages to be low frequency, slow and patient? Perhaps the sea is already telling its story. We're just too fast to listen. Now imagine something else. Imagine there's a place deep down, not a myth, not Atlantis, not a lost city, but a real geological anomaly, a rift, a fold in the crust that doesn't just go down but across. A subduction zone where reality buckles. What if you dove there and never came back? Not because you died, but because you slipped into somewhere adjacent. The pressure didn't crush you, the darkness didn't blind you. Instead, you crossed over into a pocket universe, a mirror. Not metaphorical, but material. What would that world look like? Would gravity tilt sideways? Would light behave differently? Would time pass faster or slower or in reverse? Would the creatures there recognize you? Would you recognize yourself? Or perhaps the sea is not a portal, not a brain, not a mirror. Perhaps it's a memory, a record. The ocean is old, older than bones, older than forests. It has seen everything and forgotten nothing. What if every echo, every chemical trace, every decayed body and falling feather was still there? Not biologically, but informationally, encoded in layers of sediment, in isotopes, in molecules, a perfect archive. We dig into rock to find fossils, but the ocean doesn't need digging, it keeps. The deep seabed may hold the most complete memory bank on Earth, the rise and fall of species, the flicker of ancient volcanoes, the sigh of shifting continents, maybe even us. What if future beings, alien or artificial or post-human, look not to the stars for evidence of early life, but to the trenches? Because that's where the stories are. Not written, not spoken, but layered, preserved, awaiting translation. And if so, what story would we be leaving? An era of noise, of plastic, of combustion? Or a sudden change in chemistry? An odd blip in the carbon curve? A strange sedimentary scar labelled humans? And here's one more idea. What if, somewhere in the future, humanity leaves Earth? Fully, finally, and heads for the stars? And what if, generations later, someone looks back at our blue planet, and the sea is still unexplored? What if the greatest mystery in our solar system was never Saturn's rings, or Europa's ice, or Mars' dust, but Earth's own depths? Wouldn't that be strange? To travel light years into space, while our own oceans remained mostly untouched? That's not a critique, it's a paradox, because the deep sea is both here and beyond. It is Earth's own alien. And perhaps the most science-fictional thing about it is that it's real. It exists. Right now. While you're lying there, breathing slowly, blinking into the dark, there are places beneath the ocean that no one has ever seen. Not once, not ever. Mountains taller than Everest, canyons wider than the Grand, creatures stranger than fantasy, phenomena we haven't yet named, and all of it is happening right now. No soundtrack, no narration, just depth, and that's the final thought. That science fiction doesn't have to be fiction. The future is not just out there, it's below. And the greatest questions we'll ask may not be about galaxies or AI or time travel. They may begin simply with this: what lives down there? And why have we waited so long to find out? Maybe the deep sea isn't a place at all. Maybe it's a pause, a breath that the earth takes in secret, a stillness so complete it becomes a rhythm, slow and wide enough to hold all our forgetting, all our wondering, all our awe. We've spent this journey drifting downward, past metaphors, past microbes, past history and science and story, past what we know, and further past what we admit we don't. And now, here we are, resting on the soft, silent floor of an ocean we've only barely begun to understand. Isn't that strange? That in the age of space probes and quantum models, of 5G and telescopic clarity, so much of the world remains unknown, and it's right beneath us. The deep isn't remote, it's immediate, accessible yet unreachable, earth-bound yet unknowable. And in that paradox lies something deeply human. We live, most of us, at the surface. We organise our lives in light, in clocks, in shallow navigable moments. The deep, by contrast, invites something slower, something closer to truth. Because truth isn't always a fact. Sometimes it's a feeling. Sometimes it's the realization that you're not supposed to understand everything, and that maybe understanding was never the point. Maybe reverence was. Maybe presence was. In the early minutes of this journey, we asked why the deep sea remains unexplored. We traced the boundaries: pressure, darkness, inaccessibility, expense. But the deeper we drifted, the more we saw. The barrier isn't just technological, it's philosophical. The deep sea asks more than our tools. It asks our attention. It asks us to listen to places that don't speak like we do, to feel for life that doesn't show itself in obvious ways, to consider that intelligence, beauty and meaning might exist on timelines and terms outside of our own. In a world that values speed, the deep sea waits. In a culture that praises visibility, the deep sea stays unseen. In a moment obsessed with certainty, the deep sea stays ambiguous. And in doing so, it becomes a kind of teacher, a reminder that you don't have to be understood to be worth knowing, that silence isn't emptiness, that mystery isn't a problem to solve, but a space to rest within. We met creatures that glow without fire, fish that survive without eyes, animals that live for centuries without rushing. We met chemistry without sunlight, life without surface, networks without wires, minds without mirrors. And we met, again and again, our own limited vision. Because the sea doesn't hide, it's just deeper than we've looked. So perhaps the better question isn't, why haven't we explored the deep sea? But, what would change in us if we did? Would we become quieter? Would we move more slowly? Would we look at silence, not as a void, but as a voice? Would we learn to see the unseen, not with our eyes, but with our patience? The ocean doesn't push us away. It simply doesn't chase us. It allows us to arrive, or not. It invites, but never insists. And maybe that's why it feels holy, because it offers no explanation, no pitch, just presence. A trench is a trench, a worm is a worm, a light is a light, and none of them need your opinion to go on existing. There's something comforting in that. In knowing that the world continues regardless of our gaze, that there are fish glowing right now, hundreds of meters beneath your bed, dancing in currents no one will ever name, that volcanoes erupt silently beneath the sea, shaping continents in secret, that sharks glide through water older than language. That time, real time, doesn't tick. It pulses, it stretches, it hums, and so perhaps we return to where we began. Not with data, not with answers, but with wonder. A slow wonder, a kind that doesn't need to shout. Because sometimes the most powerful feeling in the world is this: I don't know, and still, I want to learn. The ocean says, come see, and we say, okay, and that's enough. We don't need to touch the bottom to be changed by the depth. We don't need to name every fish to be humbled by their forms. We don't need to finish the map to fall in love with the terrain. We can just float here for a little while longer, drifting through the echo of what we've seen, letting our minds hold the bioluminescence, the silence, the ancient cold, letting the mystery wash over us, not as a question, but as a lullaby. So rest now. You've gone deep, and the sea is still there, below your feet, humming quietly as you breathe. Not waiting to be solved, just waiting. So where are you now? Not your address, not your city. Where are you? Are you floating somewhere between thought and dream? Has your breath slowed? Has the room around you faded into softness? Do you feel deeper? Because that's where we've been. Not in miles, but in mood. Not in depth charts, but in reflection. We've wandered through a world beneath the world, slow and strange and sacred. And maybe now, in this quiet moment, you carry a little of that with you. A little pressure, a little light, a little silence that hums even after the sound has stopped. Thank you for drifting with me. If this brought you peace, even just a little, I hope you'll return. There are more oceans to wander, more questions to ask softly, more truths to sit with, without rushing to solve. But for now, no need to hold on to anything. Let it all sink gently. Let your mind release its thoughts like bubbles. Let your body rest, held by gravity, by mattress, by moonlight. There's nothing more to do, nothing to fix. Just sleep. Sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever and whenever you are.